a playlist original.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Back to the Blockbuster. My name is Gaius Bowling, and I am joined with my boy Donnie for this very special episode that we're doing. What's up, dude?
Hey man, how's it going? It's me, guys. Donnie. I've only done this one or two other times, I believe. It's been a while, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's fun. We are our anniversary episodes tend to do really well on Back to the Blockbuster, and my only regret is that especially this year there's been so many movies that have either turned like 10, 15, 20, and so on. So it's hard to fit them all in the schedule, but like when I was doing the schedule, kind of fishing out July and August, I was like, "Oh, RoboCop is turning 35. I think it's July 17th." And I was like, I gotta fit that in there. The other two guys who are normally on, Jack and Owen, they couldn't be on today because I work from home mostly, and so it's a lot easier for me to hop on whenever I need to hop on. But they are all for any kind of promotion that gets episodes out there and kind of keeps the interest going. So they were more than happy to allow us to do this. Like you said, Donnie, you have been on before. Probably the most significant one there was the Scream one, right?
Yeah, that was actually my first one.
Your first one?
And then
Yeah.
and then I think we also did like a little small segment on the Oscars. I think it
Yeah.
was like right before like the actual award ceremony.
Right. And the Scream one was actually a lot. They were both fun, but the Scream one was a lot of fun. That was kind of got our kind of feet wet with like inviting guests on, so that was like a good initial trial run. But for those who haven't heard about you, why don't you let them know who you are, and kind of what you want to plug.
Yeah. So once again, I'm Donnie. I'm sort of an aspiring filmmaker. I go to school. I'm actually about to graduate. I also like watching movies as a result of my being here. I actually write my own reviews. As a matter of fact, I started doing that up again because I actually found the time to do it. Mad Movie Time. If you want to find me on Instagram or on Facebook, you know where to find it. But yeah, that's just something small about me. I mean, there's not a whole lot of mystery to the Donnie.
Yeah, I mean, like it's cool too because like I think through all this stuff, everyone kind of finds each other, whether it's via Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I used to hate Twitter, but now I have to. It's the primary place that we promote the podcast, and then I just got G Reels verified on Twitter, so I've kind of forcing myself. Thank you. So I'm like forcing myself to use it more, but there's so many people out there that are like either they got into the podcast game, like especially during the pandemic when there was like nothing to do, so they did it then. Are there just like movie fans that just want to write freelance their own reviews just for fun? And then there's other people that are doing it professionally and doing press junkets. Like there's so many different type of people doing this, and that's what's been really cool about starting our podcast, that we've gotten to meet so many different people from everywhere. We did a Batman Returns anniversary episode, and one of the guys that was on, he was from England, and it was way late when we recorded. We recorded like around this time, and he was perfectly okay with it. And I was like, oh well, yeah, thank you for the show.
That would seem a little late, though, don't you think? Like it seems like we might have been past midnight or something.
Yeah, it was very late for him, but he was very enthusiastic throughout the entire conversation. So
as long as he wanted to be there, then I guess.
I know, right? Yeah, that's another thing too. Like the timing is just always so hard because like I was telling the guys, like all of our best guests are either like maybe an hour ahead of us, or mostly like Eastern time, so 3 hours ahead of us. I've found it hard to find a lot of people like in LA that want to hop on and do this. Like most of our good guests are like, yeah, like I live in New York or I live in Florida, and so the timing is always like kind of tricky, but like we usually make it like work out for the most part.
Yeah, of course.
I'm usually like, hey, I'm not the one that's staying up late, so it's like up to you guys about when you want to try to do it.
I was actually gonna hop on the Twitter thing. I'm actually gonna probably start transitioning to Twitter myself. I started going through it, and I'm starting to find a liking for it. I don't know what exactly it is that I've yet to like, but There's something there, I guess, waiting for me. So I've yet to find out.
Yeah, what I've discovered too is that like if you don't go and like and retweet things that you don't want in your feed, it doesn't pop up. So if you're
Mhm.
mostly just liking and retweeting movie stuff, that's all you're really gonna see. And if you're only following certain people like that, that's all you're really gonna see. I mean, if you want to look for the more like polarizing, like negative stuff, it's definitely there. um, but
Yeah.
I'm glad that like I've learned that like oh I don't it doesn't necessarily just because it's popular gonna pop up there. Like it kind of coordinates your feed to what you're interested in because there's certain things I
Mhm.
definitely don't want to see, and I'm glad that I'm okay living in my little pop culture movie bubble because I already have to
Yeah,
watch the
of course.
real news during the day or right before I go to bed, and that's all the real shit I need as far as like what's going on in the world at the moment. So yeah, I mean you should hop on. I mean if you can find like the right like audience and stuff, it's actually a really good space. It's not. I'm
Mhm.
glad I've learned how to maneuver it since starting this.
It's
It's
probably
not
right.
all.
What I just need to do is just learn how to maneuver it, and then
Yeah.
I'll just get there my own way.
Yep. All right, so we are here to talk about RoboCop, and just a little overview for
Yes.
people who haven't seen it. I'll give you like a quick little rundown. RoboCop was released on July 17th, 1987. It is a science fiction action film directed by Paul Verhoeven, the screenplay by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner. And the film stars Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, and Miguel Ferrer. And it is set in a crime-ridden Detroit, which seems like a very realistic Detroit in the near future. The movie centers on a police officer by the name of Alex Murphy, who was murdered by a gang of criminals and subsequently revived by the mega corporation Omni Consumer Products as a cyborg law enforcer Robocop. Unaware of his former life, Robocop executes a brutal campaign against crime while coming to terms with the lingering fragments of his humanity. Um, the film was, I guess, based on like its premise and everything, and like because it on on paper and on the surface seems very ridiculous. They weren't expecting like one it to be well received by critics or to really make a ton of money. But when it came
Hmm.
out, it they were kind of encouraged by like all the early test screenings that they had for the film. They were all very positive. And by the time the movie was released, it was well received by critics. And on a $13.7 million budget, ended up grossing $53.4 million at the domestic box office, which is pretty good for 1987.
Yeah.
Um, the success of the film started a franchise of its own with sequels, including Robocop 2, released in 1990, Robocop 3 in 1993. There was a children's animated series, multiple live action television shows, video games, comic books, toys, other merchandise. A reboot was also released in 2014. And there has also been talk about a direct sequel to the 1987 film, tentatively titled
Yes.
Robocop Returns. That's been in development since 2020. I haven't really heard much about it lately.
Hmm.
But maybe like once we talk about like the overall success of the movie, we can kind of talk about where the franchise is now. Um,
Yeah.
so, since we are different ages, we've discovered it, RoboCop at different times. When did you first see it, and what did you think about it when you first saw it?
So it's kind of a funny story. So I didn't discover RoboCop by watching it. I was surfing the web on YouTube one day, and I guess this was like an era of like like very like good editing. And there's this one page that would take the scenes from like other movies, like take for example, like the one I watched was Terminator versus RoboCop.
Nice.
So we so, so we see different scenes from both movies, and they're put together to make it seem like they're actually the ones fighting each other. And I
Oh,
mean,
nice.
it's a little weird looking. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it was made like what 13, 14 years ago, but I watched it recently again, and I'm like, I can't believe I used to like this, and I still like it. Like it's clearly like not all there, but it's fun to watch, you know. So eventually, I gave in and I watched RoboCop, and I fell in love with it right away. I think what really got me going was that Kurtwood Smith is in it, and I was just off. I was just fresh off of that '70s show as well. So seeing him in this early role in his acting career, it was really impressive to see him play a bad guy, and such a foul-mouthed one at that.
Yeah, right.
He's just super
He's so
menacing, the
good.
guy. And but yeah, I really appreciated a lot of what it offered, as in terms of it being more of a satirical approach to like I guess crime fighting, if you could
Mhm.
say.
Right.
um but also because it felt like it was more in the vein of Terminator, which is also going back to that video. And I made that connection right away. I'm like, okay, so is RoboCop really like trying to do its own thing, which obviously it did, or is it just trying to mimic Terminator in terms of him being a cyborg, basically?
Right.
You know? But yeah, to this day, like I literally watched it like what this morning, like the final hour of it, and
Yeah.
it still holds up amazingly. I ended up buying a 4K steelbook of it. It was the Arrow Video
Yeah,
edition.
I need to get that. Like I keep going like I'm stupid because sometimes I will buy the most ridiculous things sometimes, and then for other things I get really cheap, and I'm like, do I want to spend? It's $41 right now on Amazon, and I guess I could get it.
Well,
um,
it's funny because I actually got lucky because I go to Barnes and Noble very frequently for Criterions, and they usually
okay.
have a pretty decent sale on them. Usually they're BOGOs, like buy one get one half off. And to my luck, there was an Arrow Video sale where all Arrow Video products were 50% off.
Oh,
So
lucky.
and so instead of paying $50 for a steelbook, I paid $25 for RoboCop, and I also nabbed the True Romance limited edition for 35 instead of 70.
Wow, that's great. That's not, and
Yeah.
like I'm gonna make fun of myself right now because I'm saying that $41 is too expensive. I definitely bought the Arrow 4K Wild Things because it was $35. um, and one could argue that that's too much money as well. And I was like, oh, whatever, take my money. It's Wild Things. I could probably do the same thing for RoboCop.
I
But
mean, you
yeah,
know what? There's nothing wrong with Wild Things, though. You gotta love the movie for its just a pure absurdity. It's just one of those
and its
movies you just
time,
can't
like the
look
time
away
it came
from.
out. Yeah, it's like it's very much a product of like what 98, 99, whenever it came out. Um,
Mhm.
and I was like, I don't have like a definitive copy of it. I had like a real like old DVD copy of it, so I was like, yeah, I'll get it, whatever.
Yeah. Plus, it probably came
But
with some cool stuff, didn't it?
yeah, it came with like all these like lobby cards and the poster and like this
Oh wow.
booklet about the making of it. A lot really extensive for a movie like that, but it was still really cool. And I actually went on Amazon today and looked at the RoboCop thing again. I was like, I should get it for. It's in my cart. I put it back in my cart. I need to just like close my eyes and just like pull the trigger and just get it because I do have
You
it on
should check,
Blu-ray.
you
Right?
should check the Barnes and Noble website just to see if they don't have that Arrow Video sale on there still, if it's still going on. That is.
Yeah, I
But
definitely should. Yeah,
But yeah,
it
Barnes
sounds
for
like
some reason they're just known for like these sales that they have like at random times, and it
yeah,
just I guess it's just a time. I guess it's just a matter of time thing. Like you just have to get it at the right time.
right. And it sounds like a really good release. All the reviews I read for it were really good, and feels like it's like the definitive release of the movie at this point. If you're
Hmm.
heavy in the 4K and all that as well. Yeah, I need to bite the bullet and just get it. And just get it.
Yeah, because you know what? It actually it's not even the theatrical cut; it's the director's cut.
Director's cut, yeah,
Yeah,
which
it's a
is
full 4K scan of it, and it looks really nice. Like, yeah, you can tell it's an '80s movie, but the touch ups, the coloring and everything it's perfect.
yeah, nice. So my time with it, I grew up with it, but my viewing of it is a lot different compared to when I was a kid and then when I got older.
Mhm.
Um, of course, it kind of came out, or not really came out, but when I was discovering like movies like that, it was in that sweet spot of like like RoboCop and Predator, like those really like those kind of late '80s like ultra violent 80s action movies. Um,
Mhm.
as a child, you only watched because they were ultra violent and they were like it was just fun to watch. You're not really watching it for anything deeper than that.
Other than yeah.
Yeah, other than like cool, look at all the like fucking gunfighting and blood and like all this stuff and like explosions and like and the character itself is cool if you're a kid as well. Um,
Mhm.
It wasn't until I think I was like 13 or 14 and started to pay attention to um, the more satirical aspects of it, that I realized that not only is it like a fun action movie, like in the vein of like all those other action movies that came out then, but it's also insanely smart. Uh,
Yeah.
I had, and like it was weird getting that epiphany like when you were a teenager. Like, oh, I've been watching this like for all the wrong reasons. I mean, like, no, not granted, they might not be the wrong reasons, but like there's more here than like what I was watching it for. And and kind of what it says about like kind of big corporations and like advertising and all that stuff, how that plays into like what we kind of how we kind of view society and like what's important to all these like big businesses, especially as their like city is like kind of crumbling around them. Like they're not really thinking about like how best to protect the people living in their city. It's all about like the financial bottom line, and like that stuff
Right.
is all in that movie. And like it was something I never paid attention to as a child, but like as you get older, and then the more I watch it as I get older, I would, someone asked me one time if it was my favorite action movie of that time period. And as far as like if I was just to say its level of intelligence and the surprising amount of like emotional like depth that's in it, with him trying to figure out like who he was, um, it's up there pretty high, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, it it always hits me a little differently every time I watch it again. Like I said, as a kid, I didn't pay attention to a lot of these things, but like even you could argue that like you don't really get a ton of time for him to like kind of rediscover who he is, but it's just enough that you like feel for him as he's like, I don't know what I was and I'm learning what I was. And then that like kind of
Hmm.
overall like sadness that you kind of feel like the scene where he goes back to his house, and he's
Yeah.
walking through it and he's walking through it as Robocop. That is like that scene alone is like all you really need to kind of like, all right, uh this is why the movie is working, because it's not just like a shoot 'em up action movie. There's actually like an emotional component there that is important, like for the characters. Like you have to care about him too, even though he is at this point just a machine. And it's a credit to like Peter Weller, and I guess like the writing too. You don't really get a lot of time to spend with him when he's Alex Murphy,
Hmm.
before he's killed. But there's a likability, I guess, in Peter Weller that there's just enough time where you do feel for him after the fact. And so there
Right.
was like all these little things about the movie that like I years and years of watching it. I've seen it so many times, and I show it to so many friends who always are like, "Oh no, it's just like a big dumb '80s sci-fi action movie," and I'm like, "No, pay
You're like,
attention
you
to
know what?
like this."
You're about to have a rude awakening. Let me tell
Yeah,
you
I
what
know. And
it
then like even they're like, dude, there's so many things I didn't really like pay attention to. Uh, like
is.
this the thing like, and like it's so funny their view of like Detroit. I mean, I don't even just say Detroit. It's just like the view of like society as a whole, even in 1987, is so not far off to where we're at now, as far as
Hmm.
like what's important to like big corporations and then the media and the stuff that they're selling. And there's like that whole other component to the movie that almost feels like it's its own little movie itself, where you're dealing with like all the big corporations and all the advertisers for the media, like and then dealing with like the crime that's like kind of infested Detroit via like all the violence and then drug use and all that stuff. And I don't know, it's way more intelligent than it has any right to be. And I know when I was researching it, like it took them a while to find someone who could direct it.
To direct it, yeah. I was actually reading up on that myself. And the actual director of what was his name? I don't know how to say his name. I know his name, but I don't know how to say his name.
Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah, so Verhoeven, apparently he actually he had to read the script two different times, and it took some hardcore convincing from his wife to actually do the movie. And I'm like, because maybe on paper, and I think this kind of goes back to what I think you said something similar to this earlier. Like on paper, it just seemed like a run of the mill action movie, but
Yeah,
I guess the more he started to read it and realize like what it was actually, that's when
yeah.
it clicked with him, and he's like, okay, yes, I got to do this. And apparently, There was a big disagreement, like even on set, between him and I don't know if it was one of the writers or if it was I guess one of the production designers or
Producers.
something, producers, yeah. And apparently there was this one scene, or there was a scene like, or the one where he takes his mask off and he reveals his face. They had a clash as to whether or not it should be dark or if it should be bright.
Oh,
And
really?
and apparently, well, obviously, well, Paul wanted it to be bright. The other guy didn't want it to be bright. He wanted it to be more dark, so it didn't, like, fully reveal like his face. Or they thought that because, or the other guy thought that because of the makeup, that it would be too obvious, or it'd look too, I
Right.
guess, kind of, it'd look weird, basically.
Right.
But obviously, it went in Paul's direction, and when it premiered and everything, the two of them apologized to each other because it turned out so good in the end. And I guess they
Yeah.
just agreed to disagree. And I'm like, well, that usually is what happens. But I thought it was the craziest thing too. Speaking of which, actually, all this Detroit talk. Do you know where that? Did you actually find out where it was filmed?
Yeah, I just looked it up. Is it Dallas, Texas? Like Dallas, Texas? Yeah. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like
That's such a
I won't even get a hit of Dallas, Texas, in like any of that movie at all.
I know
Like
you'll just
whatsoever.
be watching now. Now, next time I'll be in Dallas, I'm gonna be like, they shot RoboCop here. Like, how can I not at this point?
Yeah, so like you said, like Paul Verhoeven didn't really get the satirical content at all, which is why he had to read the script twice. And I know he's a Dutch filmmaker, so I just wonder if I guess maybe on paper it's hard to kind of see
Mhm.
exactly what they were trying to do. I'm glad that he had a wife to convince him that like, hey, this is much better than you're probably giving it credit for.
Mhm.
Um, but like, yeah, like it's funny because like Paul Verhoeven is like, you know, after RoboCop and stuff, he became known for like he doesn't really hold back when it comes to like violence and stuff like that.
Yeah, graphic
And
violence. Yeah.
but I mean, he went on to do like a Total Recall, and
Oh yeah.
then he also doesn't hold back on sex either because he did Basic Instinct, and then went back to kind of the sci-fi wall with like Starship Troopers, and so he's known for these kind of takes. I know with the violence that he kind of was like he wanted it to be kind of like so over the top that it was almost funny. I didn't see the director's cut for a long time, and I don't know if it was
Mhm.
because it was just hard for me to find, or I hadn't seen it, and I already thought the movie in its theatrical cut was pretty violent.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But then when I saw the director's cut, particularly, it's that first scene where they're doing the that was the Ed 209 presentation, and they have the guy like hold the gun and like basically uh that the
The,
machine like
the
just
yeah, the
fires
general.
off,
Yeah.
yeah, fires off at him. And I remember seeing that scene from the director's cut. And of course, like in the film, like you do see like him get shot a lot, like up in the chest and like stomach area, and then it kind of cuts away and he like falls back. But
Yeah.
then, like in the director's cut, when he falls back on that like table thing, it just continues to like pump
Yeah,
bullets into him.
I was actually kind of like cracking up about that. I'm like, they really wanted to cut this from the movie, but I see why. But like, come on, like it's actually not that bad. But at the time, I mean, yeah, maybe because
Yeah,
there wasn't really a lot of action movies that were depicting, violence the way like maybe today it would be widely accepted.
yeah,
Because we got directors like Tarantino, doing their over the top stuff, which is what they're best known for. And
yeah,
I don't know, like, yeah, that in particular. And I think there was also a slight extension of like when Murphy actually gets shot to death for the first time.
yeah,
And there was, I think there was just a more prolonged scene going on there instead of like a, very cut, go back and forth type thing. But yeah, the director's cut has some like, you'll blink and you'll miss it sort of, but there's also some very obvious additions which
yeah.
actually work pretty fairly
The
well. And it's,
I actually think the director's cut version of when Alex Murphy gets killed is a little better. And I forgot who explained it this way, but someone explained that it was supposed to be like extremely violent and graphic because they almost compared it to like the crucifixion with Jesus Christ, and then of course his resurrection after that. Like it needs
Mhm.
to be brutal and really violent, so that when he comes back as like this kind of like more superior being, that it's more like
Right.
significant. And I mean, like I said, in the theatrical cut, it does seem like he really gets it bad, but like, and you can make an argument that like in the scene where he's getting shot in the theatrical cut, you're not really seeing a lot of like bullets going into him. You're seeing like the upper kind of half of the shot and him just
Yeah.
reacting to being shot. Compared to like the director's cut, it's like you're seeing him full body get like riddled
Hmm.
with bullets. You know, the scene where he gets shot in the hand, that was already in the theatrical cut, right? Where where
He shot
Clarence
off
like,
his hand.
yeah, where he's like which is so sadistic, just like Clarence Monaco doing that whole like, uh yeah. But I kind of agree. I think like there's a point to be made to having it both ways, where like what you don't see and what you're kind of hearing is more like visceral, because like the way he's reacting is so uh impactful. You almost don't need to
It's
see it.
terrifying.
Yeah, you almost don't need to see it.
it
Yeah, but then when you do see it in its
feels like
entirety,
it
though,
feels
it
like
still works.
it just feels like you're watching someone, like get blown away like that. It's a very it accomplished what it wanted to do, and that is to make someone uncomfortable. You're
Yeah.
just watching somebody like helplessly get shot to death, and it's a pretty hard scene to watch. In particular, even on
Yep.
rewatch, I still kind of squirm at the sight. I'm like, they really went all out with this. Wow.
Yeah, it's extreme. You know, talking about the more like intelligent aspects, the screenwriter Edward Neumeier talked about how he really wanted to have a real like satirical like glimpse into like 1980s like business culture. Like this was like
Mhm.
the time period where like they call like basically call them like yuppies, like this kind of like young professional like Wall Street kind of businessmen that were like kind of going around right then. And this was like during the era of like Ronald Reagan and like big money and like kind of stuff like that. And he really wanted to poke fun of that whole environment, because like behind all these like big businesses and all this like wealth was all this like excess that was going on behind the scenes, which is why there's like a ton of well, not maybe not a ton. I mean, there's a lot actually. There's a lot of like references to cocaine in the movie. Like most of these characters, like even though they're like important business people, particularly like Miguel Ferrer's character. I mean, he has that whole scene once he gets that deal with like Robocop after he kind of sabotages the. Well, he doesn't really sabotage the Ed 209 thing. He takes advantage of like the Ed 209 presentation not working the way it should have, and then kind of presents like his thing with RoboCop, and like he has that whole like little celebration. What I'm guessing with the two hookers at his place, and that whole scene is all about
The two. I think he described him as the two models.
yeah, two models, and that whole scene is all about excess and just like they're just all
Mhm.
glowing lines and like, and it's just like, and that's kind of like what that period was like. And he really wanted to make a movie that kind of poked fun at it, but also kind of was like, this is also what's going on too. Like
It's funny that you say that about the cocaine aspect, because something that I noticed when I watched it this morning is that Ray Wise's character, I forget his name, but he has like this little like weird like vape looking device, and he puts it in
yep.
his nose. Now I don't know if that's like I could just go out on a limb and say somebody predicted vaping. Like
Yeah, right.
but but it just struck me as odd, because like yeah, this is the 80s. They're poking fun at a lot of things. Like, what if they're poking fun at like cocaine, but like doing it in a different form, and this is like something that's going straight into his nose, but maybe it's like vapor or something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But it was just something weird that I noticed. I'm like, is that supposed to be like future coke or something? Like, what am I looking at here?
Sure. Oh yeah, and I in addition to the main cast I mentioned earlier, because I'm glad you mentioned Ray Rice. He played Leon Nash, and then Paul McCrane played Emil, who meets a very terrible demise in the end. Jesse D. Goings was Joe, and then Calvin Jung was Steve, and they are all members of Clarence Barnaker's gang. And like, even though all of them may not have like a ton of lines and stuff, but as a group of people together, they're a very memorable bunch.
Yeah,
Um,
the chemistry there was remarkable. Like even like it's like you say, they didn't even have to say anything maybe, and it just worked because their presence alone was enough.
yeah,
Because you just
I
look at them and you're like, yeah, they're the perfect fit. Yeah, this is gonna work.
yeah, I also like that. Like, it's interesting because yes, Clarice Barnager is a villain, right? And you're kind
Mhm.
of like set up in the beginning to really feel like he's the central villain until you realize that like someone more important is kind of pulling their strings, and that's like the Ronnie Cox character. Uh,
Yeah,
but like you get introduced to Clarence Barnager. He kills off Alex Murphy, and then most of that gang is like gone for a bit until
yeah,
RoboCop kind of figures out like who he was and who he needs to find to figure out who he was. So like they make a huge impact, even though like they don't dominate like a ton of screen time if you like watch the movie as a whole as far as being like central villains. And then since like you get the sense that like Dick Jones is just based on who he is as a person, that he is probably the one that is behind the
he's
scenes, like being the puppet, yeah, puppeteer.
he's the puppet master.
Yeah, but you're so like enthralled by like who these obvious villains are. But I thought it was just interesting that yeah, they don't dominate a ton of screen time. They're missing from a good middle portion of the movie until they need to be reintroduced again.
Yeah,
And but they all make a really good impact. It's the initial like scene where, of course, with the guy when they burn the money and he throws the one dude out of the van, like all that stuff is really like just over the top and hilarious. And then it's the scene where they're testing out like I don't know what kind of weapon that was,
the
where they were just
giant
shoot,
snipers.
yeah, they were just shooting him off in the middle of in the streets of Detroit. Um,
Mhm.
but they all look like they're having so much fucking fun, and like their camaraderie is just like really good together. I'm not saying that I was rooting for them by any means, but like they were just
But the
a
fact that
fun
they were
bunch.
so realistically chaotic was actually it was something making note of.
Right, and they kind of play off each other really well. They play off that chaos really well. Uh, like you buy that they've been like a gang for like a very very long time. Um,
And they only work together probably for like just 5 hours worth of time.
yeah, exactly. Um, so just going into like the development, I guess I didn't even know this, but the first draft of the script was called RoboCop: The Future of Law Enforcement, which would have been a very long, cheesy title.
It would have been the most 80s title
It would
for a
have been,
most 80s.
it would have been very. I can just see the like RoboCop: The Future of Law Enforcement. It would just be that, and it'd be really cheesy. Um, it started making the rounds in 1985, and eventually ended up at Orion, where they greenlit it, and they wanted Edward Neumeier and his writing partner to write a second draft of the script, and it was just a lot of like trying to like get the tone and everything right, I guess. And they were they were supportive of what they were trying to do, but like you said earlier, when it came to like you had to find someone in the helmet that actually understood what was going on. And I think it's kind of cool that like Paul Verhoeven didn't get it at first, and then he did, because he was already bringing like his technical sensibilities to the movie, as far as like he knew how to like do the action, he knew he
Mhm.
wanted to go very over the top with the violence, because like again, like it's that whole concept of like everything about the movie is making fun of excess, whether it's the drug use, in this case in the movie it's the violence as well. He already knew that, and I think it's cool that he kind of discovered the satirical stuff as he probably was doing it. I mean, as he read it again and again, it was like, okay, I totally get why, you know, these cheesy, like kind of like ad commercials that we're throwing into the movie ties into like what's going on with the overall story too. Because it's weird because you have like all this commercialism and selling this certain image of like, uh, yeah, via this like news program that's running throughout the entire movie, but you're selling it in this city that is so corrupt and so destroyed by like crime. Like no one, like it seems like no one really cares about what's
What's going
happening
on
there.
TV?
Like their police force is about to go on strike, and they're being worked to the bone and not getting paid enough, and like all like, there's so much of, it's crazy because like so much of that mirrors aspects of stuff that we've seen the last few years. And it's a lot of people talk about when you go back and watch these movies that came out in the 80s, and their depiction of what the future was going to look like. And I wonder if like people watching this in 87 are like, no, we'll be in a better place. And then you're watching it in like 2022 and it's like, we're there and maybe a little worse.
We're there and a little worse. But luckily they haven't invented giant cannon snipers yet. So once that happens, then maybe we'll start running. But
yeah, no cannon snipers and no robots roaming the city too.
At least not yet that we know of, and I'm just hoping that day doesn't come anytime soon.
I know exactly. And I'm glad when they finally got the story and stuff together when it came to casting. Like, I guess for Alex Murphy, they considered Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Ironside. Oddly enough, both of them are in Total Recall.
That's true.
Rutger Hauer, Tom Berenger, Armand Asante, Keith Carradine, and James Remar were all considered for it. Orion really wanted Schwarzenegger just based on at that time Terminator. he was Terminator. And that was a lot of the reason they wanted him for it. But he's already physically imposing. And so they wanted someone who, as a human, was smaller in stature so that when they get in the suit, there is a big like contrast from like, from what he was into what he becomes. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger is already a robotic actor anyway. I mean, that's just his style. He's played the action hero for so long, like it never changes. But that's why we love him, for that exact reason. Yeah, exactly. And like I can maybe see him like spouting off some of the lines. But this is also me looking at it through a lens of like knowing what Arnold Schwarzenegger is as a whole, as his whole filmography. I don't know how I would have felt about it if I was like new to this back then and they were like, oh, like we think we want him for the part. If I would think he would even be good for it. I do agree though that they're neat. I like that they kind of came up with this duality of like we needed someone who wasn't physically imposing to begin with,
right? To
kind of like separate the two.
You see Rutger Hauer. I'm like, that would have been a very interesting Alex Murphy.
Yeah, he would have been. Yeah, that would have been interesting too. I think so. Arnold Schwarzenegger, I guess his people, and then some people involved with Orion were also like, well, his face is going to be obscured for most of the movie because at this point he's already Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they're like, you don't get Arnold Schwarzenegger in your movie and cover his face.
Just cover his face, yeah.
So Peter Weller was a good choice because he was good. He was a good hire. Paul Verhoeven really liked him. He also said that I quote, his chin was very good, which was very important, I guess, because you're gonna.
I think that was one of the biggest things about casting for RoboCop is your chin good enough?
You have a proper chin. Do you have a proper chin?
At that point, I really don't care if you can act or not. I want to know, is your chin good enough?
Yeah, exactly. And that he also didn't command a huge salary then because he wasn't like a huge star. Mm-hmm. Like he was known in sci-fi circles because he was coming off of the adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, which I have just recently saw because I just got I think it's called Search for Tomorrow. It's like it's the same people that did the Search of Darkness documentaries for like the 80s horror movies. They did like a 4 hour documentary retrospective of the sci-fi genre from like 1980 to 89. And I saw they actually showcased that movie, and it looked so over the top ridiculous I had to see it. And Peter Weller is pretty good at it. I wouldn't have guessed he would be like RoboCop after watching it, but I'm guessing they thought that like, okay, he must have like he's multi-talented. Yeah. They also said that he knew how to also move his body well, even in the suit, even though he was like restricted a lot by how bulky the suit was.
Yeah, apparently it was like another 40, 50. It was like a 40 or 50 pound suit, and apparently a lot of the movements were very hard to achieve sometimes because of. And he was even losing weight, I believe, in the suit because of how hot it was.
It was how hot it was. So, like, I guess to like train on how to move, he would like move in like a fluid movement style, and then have like kind of like a stiff ending, so everything was more robotic. And he would train just wearing like a football basically like outfit before he got in the suit. So he knew exactly how to move in something that bulky. What's funny is that one of the things that he has said about working on the first two movies, because he was only in the first two, is that working in the suit was an absolute nightmare. Like that was like he hated that part of it,
Mhm.
and I mean, I can see why. The way you described it, like just probably like sweating out in that thing, and like not being able to not being able to move the way you want to. Like I know he trained on how to move in the suit to kind of get that right, but like you're still restricted by like how bulky the thing is. And then like
Mhm.
it's the head movements too, because like you're not really supposed to like you're not moving like a human. And he kind of had to get that like all that movement right as well. Um but he also said working with Verhoeven was like the reason he ultimately took the part, and he was happy that he did. Um and he's one of those people too that like I was trying to look up like what does he say about the movie now. He's very positive about the film now as a whole, especially about how it's held up since it came out. He might have like little comments about like, oh, this was difficult to do while we were filming it, but he is still, I guess, surprised by how much it has, how well it's held up
Like
over the
how
years.
well received it was over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, and how many more new people discover it. It's not just like
Mhm.
a lot of people just rewatching it. It's like a new generation constantly discovering the movie.
I kind
Um,
of want to hear his thoughts on the reboot.
I do too. I actually would like to hear a lot of their thoughts on it.
I
I
I
totally forgot Michael Keaton was in it too. By the way.
because I'll be honest with you, I didn't hate the reboot, but I had a lot of problems with it only because it was dumbed down with a PG-13 rating.
Yeah, it
And I
was.
think I think that was a big slap in the face to the original per se, because I mean the original was known for its notorious depiction of violence, and in this PG-13 one, I felt like there were a lot of punches held.
Yeah, and also kind of backed away. I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it backed away from like the satirical stuff that kind of made the original one like so good.
Mhm.
And that could be just a product of like when it's made, right? Like the '80s
Yeah,
stuff was a lot easier to kind of satirize because like that stuff was really going on in the news in like real time. It was easy to make fun of. Um, Maybe they thought they couldn't really do that as well in 2014. Uh, I didn't hate it either. I remember like thinking like it's not great, but like I didn't like think it was like a total
because I'll be
train
honest,
wreck.
I was still entertained by what I saw. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah,
it's like I said, I think it served more as a remake than a reboot, because apparently it was supposed to be like a soft reboot, and I don't know if that meant like, okay, this is still taking place or the original's canon or not. But
yeah,
I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, why would they greenlight this if it wasn't going to be rated R? I get it, maybe
exactly.
from a box office standpoint, yeah, PG-13 movies bring in the money because wider audiences, people buy tickets for those. People sometimes bring their kids, you know.
Yeah.
But I did like Joel. What's the
Oh,
Kinnaman?
Kinnaman. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought he played a very solid Alex Murphy though. I thought he
yeah. I
fit the
think it was good.
character very well.
I think the biggest problem. And I'm glad we can kind of get this part out of the way now because like I think the biggest problem I had with it is some of the things you're comparing to the original they don't land as well. Like his murder in this doesn't land as well than it does in the original movie.
Yeah,
So there's like a lot,
that was my biggest irks about the movie, was that his
and
death wasn't really a death. It was just an accident, but it was
yeah,
just
and honestly, that has to land the hardest because you want to be able to go like, oh, like you want
you
to
want to
feel
sympathize with them. Yeah.
sympathize with them, and it doesn't really land as hard. I mean, I like Michael Keaton in almost anything, so like it was funny. I was thinking about the movie because I hadn't seen the movie in a while, and I was like, I totally blanked on him being in it. Like I knew, of course, that he was in it, but like thinking back on it, I was like, fuck, he was in that movie. It was like during the whole like it was during the whole like Michael Keaton resurgence a little bit.
Yeah. It's fun. You know who else was in that movie that I almost forgot was in it, and he has a very small role. Jackie Earl Haley.
Oh yeah, there are some
He played.
significant people in it.
You could think of him as the Clarence of this reboot, only because he's kind of the right hand man for Michael Keaton's character.
Yeah,
So he's the one that's just following orders and like, I don't care if I'm the bad guy kind of character, but
exactly.
I'm just doing my job, man.
Exactly. Yeah. As far as the other cast, Anne Lewis was originally going to be played by Stephanie Zimbalist. She was on Remington Steele. The show got canceled in '86, so she was able to do RoboCop. But the show was popular with audiences, so they revived it, and she was contractually obligated to go back to Remington Steel. So she had to drop out of RoboCop, and then Nancy Allen was like her immediate replacement. And Nancy Allen has said that she thought the title of the movie was terrible, but then she read the script and was like surprised by how smart it was and how like how much depth there was to it. So she ultimately like took it. Nancy Allen, if like you're familiar, other people familiar, most people know her from like Carrie. She's a bitch in that movie. So that's what's funny about her playing like Anne Lewis.
Like
because I think she had played good people after that, but I was trying to think of like
her. Actually, in the one movie that I really love her in is Blowout, and that's also something she starred with John Travolta in, and it's actually one of my favorite De Palma movies. Just because it's just eerily scary. It's not like in your face scary. It's just the circumstance of it is just super like, oh, this can actually happen. I think that those are the kind of movies that can get under your skin because of the realistic chance of it happening.
Right. And then she's also in like Dressed to Kill, which is like another really good movie as well. So like I guess when Paul Verhoeven met her, because she, if you know her from Carrie and like her other stuff, she has long, gorgeous blonde locks, and he immediately told her that she had to like cut her hair, so it was more appropriate. It was more because it was like just more appropriate for the role, but she was willing to do it because she really liked the story. She liked the script. She wanted to work with Peter Weller, so she was perfectly fine.
It's funny because she actually, at first glance, she didn't really know what Paul had worked on, I guess, prior to that, and she realized that he was actually a director of like a very over the top like kind of sitcom comedy. And they actually, and apparently they play it throughout the movie, like on the TVs. If you notice, there's like different TV shows playing, and I think that's one of them. And she actually was skeptical about working with Paul because she thought that she was working with like I guess an unprofessional type director,
like a joke.
Like a joke. Like she's all like,
she's coming off of working with like De Palma and stuff, right? So she's like these like auteurs, and then like she's like, oh, like this guy. Is he serious? She apparently what they both ended up liking, which is why they decided to cut her hair. They didn't want to sexualize her at all. They wanted her. They wanted her to just be a cop, and she wasn't going to be like the female love interest. Also, I like that too because I think a lot of those movies back then, even movies that into the '90s and early 2000s, would have made her like also his romantic love interest as well. And honestly, it's cool that she's just his buddy, and I think it's a testament to both of them because you don't really get to know them together as a pair too much. It's just that initial like that meet and greet, and then they go off together on as partners just once. But I guess that's a testament of the writing, and then like their camaraderie that they kind of quickly built as actors together. Because I actually liked I really liked the scene where they're walking. He's RoboCop already, and they're walking through the hallway, and she knows that like it's him, and she basically is like trying to ask him questions, and he's like trying to ignore her, and she does the whole like
he kind of like looks at her and he kind of like backs up like
and then she does the whole like Murphy it's you thing, and then he's like, oh, I gotta go, and he's like his exact line is like, I gotta go somewhere, there's a crime happening, and he has to like leave. And I thought that scene was so good though, because it's like you're just these little moments where she has to like pick up on the fact that like something is not quite right, and something's off, and I'm glad they went that direction and didn't make her like someone that would also fall in love with him.
I think that's one of the things that I really liked for like my first viewing was that they didn't, like you say, they didn't turn her into a love interest right away, or they didn't like prioritize that as many movies had prior and even after that. It was just nice to see. It was just nice to see an actual like female character, not be the typical portrayed one in a Hollywood movie. So that was a very refreshing aspect for me, and I really loved what she did with the role. I thought her character was brilliantly played out. I mean, even in the sequels, like RoboCop 2, like I think the chemistry between her and Weller was like there was a lot of improvement there. Maybe the movie not so much, but those two on screen together, they were excellent. And then
Yeah.
RoboCop 3 happened, and I'm like,
And then RoboCop 3 happened, and then, like, not necessary at all. Like, okay, you didn't have to offer.
yeah,
It's
I
like,
know. I'm like, okay, well, something's not right here. They didn't bring back Peter Weller. Peter Weller didn't want to come back for the third one, and for obvious reason. I mean, dodged a bullet there probably, but I was
yeah,
so mad because I watched RoboCop 3 and I'm like, okay, well, I mean, how bad could this be, right? You know,
yeah.
the only thing they did was recast, and no, they straight up just killed their character in the first 5 minutes. I'm like,
Yep. That's ridiculous. Here's what I'll say about RoboCop 2 really quick. Initial viewings of it, like back in the day. So like I guess as a young kid and then like teenager and then getting older, I did not like it as of course I don't like it as much as the first one. I can say that honestly, I don't think it's as
yeah,
good. But what I've discovered in like maybe the last 5 or more years is it's good in its own right, like in its own way, and like what it's doing, like the different approach it's taking. It goes way harder with the satirical aspects of it and like the comedy a little bit more. It's dark comedy. It's really dark, but
hmm
like there's less of an emotional aspect to it and more of like a kind of dark comedy, like
I
poking
think I
fun
think what it
aspect.
tried I think what it tried to do is separate itself from the first movie and try to be its own movie. Which
Yeah,
by any standard, I mean any sequel is going to try to do that. You know, they don't want to like repeat what the first one did, and that's the mistake that a lot of sequels do nowadays.
right.
And I think that's why I think that's why I didn't hate it. You know, like I really liked what I watched. You know, I mean, because at the end of the day, RoboCop 2 is just an action sequel. Like
Yeah,
it didn't want to take itself too seriously. You know, they probably had a bigger. I think they had a bigger budget for that one since
they
the
did. Yeah,
funding. So I
yeah.
mean, yeah,
They had a bigger
but
budget based on the success of the first one.
mhm.
It's interesting too. I just wonder, like, even going into it, if they realize, like, even from the script, they're like, this is like way different from what we did before. Well, it is. It's different, but like in a lot of ways, it isn't because like that satirical stuff is in the first one. I just think they kind of led with it in the sequel. They just were like, this is what
Mhm.
it's more of that throughout the whole thing, and then on top of that, it's ultra violent. And then I know critics took issue with like the fucking foul mouth kid that's like part of the little like crime syndicate as well. A lot of people, like Roger Ebert in particular, didn't like it, that aspect of it. But like I said, like I think like in recent viewings, I'm like, all right, for what it is, like
It's
it's
not a
way
bad
better than
movie.
three. Like at least it
Yeah,
tried
well,
to
way
do
better.
so.
At this point, I retcon 3 completely because
You just like
I'm sorry. Like I know whoever worked on it probably did their best and what they could, but it just it just shouldn't have been done. And I
yeah,
get it. Maybe from a financial standpoint, it could have actually been successful, and that's probably why they greenlit a third one. But
yeah.
you know, seeing as to how the second one turned out, I mean, what more could have been possibly done?
Right. And the thing
And
is, like with the sequel, the second one, it wasn't that it was a flop. It, like you said, the budget was bigger, so it was in like $25 to $30 million budget. It did gross less than the original movie. It's $45.7 million here, but it didn't completely like collapse on itself. So I can see
mhm.
why they're like, we can make a third movie. Um, but they went like they went way out the box and like did not please anyone that saw it. I think their money shot in that trailer was that he flies and that he has like the suit where he actually
That's
like
right.
that was their I really remember that as a kid. That was like the money shot from like the trailer, and I was like, oh well, maybe that'll be cool. I even knew as a child that the movie wasn't good. Like as a child, I was like, this isn't good. Like sometimes you just know, and I knew
Yeah,
then.
exactly.
Um, Getting into like some of the bad guys. So we talked about Kurtwood Smith, who you were saying like that you at the time when you saw it was like that '70s show. That's what you knew him from. I
Yeah.
had never, of course, like when I saw it when I was younger, I never heard of him before. Um, I have the, of course, the opposite. I think like where it's like I've seen RoboCop, and then that '70s show comes out, and I'm like, that's the guy from like RoboCop, and like not foul mouth and different in his own right, but like much
Mhm.
more endearing on that '70s show. I guess that he auditioned for Dick Jones as well, and they were like,
Really?
no, and they were like, no, you are Clarence. The only issue they had was that he was known more for television. He hadn't had any real like film hits yet.
Yeah, I think he only had one other small role before. I think this was before RoboCop, and that was for Rambo 3.
Yeah, and
I think that was
so
like one of his only other like notable features. And yeah, he did do a lot of TV. I'm not too familiar with his TV career, but other than the '70s show,
let me
but
show. Here's an interesting thing though. They said that his character was scripted to wear glasses so that he would look like a Nazi party member named Heinrich Himmler. And Kurtwood Smith was not aware that that's what they were going for. He said that he interpreted it as the character portraying an intelligent and materialistic front to conceal being a sneering, smirking drug kingpin. So he was like, he was like, they had their vision of it, and I had mine, and they both kind of worked together, I guess, because they're both really
yeah, I was
evil.
gonna say I'm like because something worked there. I mean, they both clearly had different interpretations of the character, and I guess they just met somewhere in the middle then. Because Clarence Boddicker is probably one of my favorite villains. I mean,
No, he's so good.
yeah, amazing.
He's so good.
It's
Um,
it, it's you know what does it for me is his final line, because there's no other delivery that Kurtwood Smith has ever done other than dumbass. But
okay.
it doesn't get any better than Sayonara RoboCop, and then gets
Yeah,
stabbed in the neck. And I'm like, this is such a good movie, man. I'm
yeah. I also love, and I still laugh at it every single time when he comes into the house where the two models and that guy, he has to kill him with the, I guess, the grenade or whatever, the bomb.
Mhm.
And he walks in, and the first thing he says is "bitches leave," and they all like run out. And it's just so straightforward and deadpan, like it's so good.
Now,
Like
now,
his
now that you mentioned that, when I was watching it, like actually when I first bought the steelbook, I couldn't help but laugh at that, because I'm like, how did I miss this? Like, I don't remember this line at all. And it was such a genuinely like laughable moment for me, because I had never like noticed what I guess I never like registered with me very well. And I guess now with the sense of humor that I've got, and
yeah.
seeing him after all these years, I guess it just rang well with me or something.
Yeah, and it's funny too because for how evil that character is, my train of thought is like, he's like, you don't belong here. This isn't about you two. You guys get out. Like he could have easily just held them there too, but he's like, no, you guys go. And it was
No,
just like
come on.
I laugh every time he says it, and he's also really good. I mean, he's good throughout the whole movie, but that scene where he's getting like thrashed by RoboCop. He's just trying to tell him like it's not me that you want. Like there's so much more going on basically like about OCP. Like they like run the cops, and like that's when you find out that like Dick Jones is the one behind it all. But he's so good in that scene, and I also love when he gets carried into the police station.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He just
and
spits on the paper and he's like, just give me my
give
fucking,
my fucking phone call. And the guy grabs the paper, is like, it's it's so good. Yeah, he probably is one of my favorite movie villains, and like
Mhm.
you could just tell that he had so much fun playing him.
Oh yeah.
Like that had to be like incredibly fun to be like that fucking evil, and like get away with it for a little bit. I know it's just a movie, but like yeah,
Out of my own like curiosity, I wonder how many times it took to do the the robot noises that he makes right before he shoots off Murphy's
oh
hand.
yeah, actually, it should be interesting to know. Yeah,
I feel like there was a lot of giggling because of it, because even at like when you're on set and that was like the first take and you just hear somebody go like you can't help but laugh, like it's a giggling moment.
yeah. And then Ronnie Cox, who plays Dick Jones, he was known for playing just nice people throughout most of his career. He's like basically like America's grandfather. He's like had that like kind of look about himself. So he took on the role because he wanted to like actually play someone more villainous and like what he described as like more masculine and more like not just so like kind of hunky dory guy next door.
Mhm.
Um, and Paul Verhoeven saw that in him too, like being able to like if he could play the opposite, the extreme opposite of what that is, then that character will really work. Um, the character does really work actually,
Oh yeah.
even though like, and you get it really in that scene in the bathroom where the guy is like talking shit about him, and then everyone in the bathroom realizes like, oh, like Dick Jones is in the bathroom, we gotta go. And that
Like
one
we
guy
gotta
ends up like
leave.
kind of that one guy ends up kind of like peeing on himself before he leaves the bathroom. And like that whole conversation when he just like grabs the back of his head, and when he's basically telling him like you basically like fucked with the wrong guy, basically, yeah, like you get it then. They're like, oh, this guy is like
he means business. Like
yeah, this is not just this is not just some like corporate dude in a suit. Like he's just like yeah, like he completely lands that role. I think I thought he was like really really good, and it is interesting though that he kind of was known for just playing like really nice dudes back then.
I if anything else, I'd seen Ronnie talk another Dexter.
That's true. Yeah, another dark show. And then like for like just the I mean everyone loves Ray Rice. I got to interview Ray Rice for Joe Blow, and it was I mean he's been in so many like if you're like a horror fan or just like a fan of just like this kind of sci-fi stuff, that genre, Ray Rice has been in so many things. And I got to mention Robocop briefly. He likes talking about it. Like Robocop is like a highlight of his career for him. He really enjoyed playing that character and working with all those guys. He said that they were all really fun to work with. Oh. And it was interesting too about Paul McCrane, who plays Emil. I used to watch ER when I was growing up for some reason, and he was on that for like several seasons, and his character met like a not a demise as nearly as bad as what happens with Emil and like and RoboCop. But it's just interesting to see these people, and like because on ER he was a relatively nice person, and he had like he kind of was a boss and kind of edges and stuff. Like he was complicated in that way, but it was interesting seeing him play someone like a little softer than Emil was. I think of the gang, other than Clarence, Emil's probably my favorite, only because I think that he has the most to do outside of Clarence, I think, as far as like the rest of the guys. Because he has that whole sequence at the gas station, which is actually really, really funny. And it starts off really funny, and then like, of course, like once Murphy pieces together, like, oh, this guy was a part of what happened to me, then that whole scene takes on a whole life of its own too. And then of course he gets it the worst in the end. And I will be 100% as a child that like frightened me as a kid.
It's it's a genuinely frightening moment, for an action movie. This is like some really Cronenberg type of shit. We just saw a guy go through some toxic waste. Okay, okay, he's still alive. I don't know how, and it just explodes when he gets hit by a car. It's something you just don't expect to see in a movie.
Yeah. I was like, I remember as a kid, I was like, what's going on? Why? What's happening?
I think that was one of the scenes that actually freaked people out, like especially noting of the violence. I think that was actually one of the moments that they made note of for being so violent.
Yeah, because when he gets taken out by the it's brutal.
It's a very terrible way to go, and I think everyone can agree with that. I would not want to be exploded by a car.
Exactly. And then Jesse D. Goings plays Joe. Joe is the one with the funny laugh. I can't really. It's hard for me to get right, but he's the black one, the black guy.
Yeah. he's the one that buys the car.
Yeah, he buys the car. Oh yeah, then like Clarence, like I got one. He's like, I got one just like yours, Clarence. And then Clarence is like, oh no, you don't.
He's like, nope, the only one. Blows up his car.
And that scene is hilarious, actually. He also has the strangest scene with Nancy Allen, and I've never quite understood. He's peeing, and she's got him cornered, right? Like basically, like freeze. And then he's like, "Oh, do you mind?"
And then he puts his hands up.
And then if you mind if I zip this up? And then she looks down for like a second, and in that moment that she looks down, he's able to like kind of subdue her and knock her out. Like I get why it needs to be done because she has to be separated from Murphy. It always just felt I don't know if it's the direction or how they approach that scene. It always felt weird to me. I was like, why wouldn't she like call for him, or I don't know, like it's always been like weird to me.
I think it's because, like, since her character is sort of she's supposed to be strong and independent. She's supposed to be like her own, like, she's the backup. She's her own backup. And I
Yeah,
guess, like, in the situation, she felt she could handle it, and that's probably why she didn't call out or anything. But at the
yeah,
same time, it felt a little out of character too for her to, like, fall for something like that.
right. Yeah, it was. I mean, people talk about like kind of like plot contributors or whatever, like things that need to happen to move the plot forward, and like
Hmm.
they needed to separate her from him
Right.
so he could be alone, and that was the one way to do it. I just thought the execution of it is just so weird because I was like, why does she look down? There's no need for her to look down. She's got him already. Like what?
I,
I
I
don't
guess I
get.
guess it, I guess it was just one of those, like lightly humorous moments in the movie, that it kind of needs just to, like, break the ice a little bit.
Yeah,
Because that's all I can
yeah,
really think of. Because yeah, like I said, it just fell out of character. But at the same time, I could probably see why they wanted to do that. And
yeah,
being that, what's his name, Joe's character, you know, the
yeah.
character that he's a bit of a joker in his own ways. So I guess,
Right.
he's playing tricks, and she fell for it. So there's that.
That's true. So like you said, they filmed in Dallas, Texas. I still can't believe that.
I know.
And like,
I found that out today, actually, because I googled the movie earlier. I don't know what I was googling it for, but I the first thing that said, like, when I was, like, reading, like, the brief Google description, is that it said location Dallas, Texas. I'm like, what? Like, that can't be right. That cannot be right. No. And sure enough.
it was, yeah, like Dallas City Hall is actually the exterior of the OCP headquarters.
Okay.
Um, and like they said that Detroit does make a brief appearance in stock footage, but that's about it. And that's during the opening of the movie. It's over the like stock footage that over the like
Mhm.
RoboCop like logo, where it's like showing different like scenes within the logo. That's the only bit of Detroit. They thought about doing it in Detroit, um, but they had too many low. They said low, featureless, and visually uninteresting buildings, which is why they didn't shoot in Detroit. Um, they also considered Chicago, but it was dismissed for aesthetic reasons. New York City was too high, and California also had. Oh, they were. It was also part of. They were filming another project in California that was similar to RoboCop, and they didn't want. They wanted to kind of distance themselves from being in that area. They considered Houston as well, but Dallas was chosen because it offered more modern buildings, as well as older, less maintained areas that they could use to double Detroit.
I
Which I
wonder if
guess
they
they did a
actually blew up.
good.
I wonder if they actually blew up stores, or if those are actually just set pieces. Because I would have. I probably would
I
have.
know,
That
right?
probably would have broken my heart.
I know. The initial budget for principal photography was $11 million. It went up to $13.1 million because they shot in Dallas for 9 weeks. But it became clear that shooting was going to take a lot longer. So it
Mhm.
actually, because they extended the shoot, the budget went up to $13 million.
Yeah, apparently, what happened there was that they hadn't shot Murphy's death scene yet, and I guess they had gone to the studio and told him, you know what, like, we're really not going to finish this, so, like, we don't have the budget for it. So they showed him, like, the cut so far of what they had, and the studio liked it that much that they actually gave him the extra funding for that death scene, and that was the last thing that they shot. And in my
Nice.
mind, I'm thinking, well, that's that's
That's
lucky.
actually, yeah, it's lucky. Yeah, yeah.
But I
Um,
think I think that I think that's why the death scene is so effective too, because they had already done everything. They got a feel for what the movie was going to be,
oh, like what he would need
and
to go through and all that too. Like you, yeah,
exactly. And so I guess that's why the death scene works so beautifully, because everyone was already, like, there. They knew the assignment. They just had to do it, and may I say, they did it wonderfully. Because
but yeah. So we talked about the costume a bit and how Peter Weller had to learn how to move in it. The costume was not finished until sometime into filming, so they were filming other things without him being in the costume.
Mhm.
It didn't affect the filming schedule at all. Um, but it Peter Weller lost out on like a month of rehearsal time in the suit because it wasn't done yet. And we talked about earlier, like the costume stuff was some of the things that frustrated Peter Weller, and that was a lot of it because it didn't get to him until well into filming. It is really bulky. It's really cumbersome. It took hours for him to kind of adapt to it each day. And he also said he had a hard time seeing through the helmet visor and interacting with other performers while being in the suit. Um, he actually, interesting story. He fell out with Paul Verhoeven over an argument over the suit and was fired. And Lance Henriksen, who is also in Terminator, was considered as a replacement, but the costume was already built for Peter Weller. So they basically were like, okay, we need to talk this out and figure this out. And they ended up like kissing and making up, and everything worked out. But that's how bad the costume situation was, where like Peter Weller wasn't like, you don't understand how like cumbersome this is, and Paul Verhoeven, who they said had like a little bit of a rep for being like verbally aggressive on set, was like, just fucking do it, and just and don't question me.
I think where we can draw the line on that one is that he was definitely no Kubrick, because I mean,
Right.
if you know anything about the treatment that Kubrick put his actors through, I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
anybody will ever come close to that. And me, I hope that it doesn't come close to that
Yeah.
ever.
Kurtwood Smith said that like he would be verbally aggressive offset, maybe to behind the scenes people, mostly with like costume, production design, that kind of stuff. He very rarely yelled at the actors, but he said that he was too engrossed with making the movie to be really sociable with like the performers, which he said he was fine with, because he's like, I'm here to act and not here to like, make friends, basically. So and then like you said, the Nancy Allen thing, like she brought that up as far as what she initially thought of him. But she said she ended up like having a great relationship with him while making it, and so did Ronnie Cox.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, Peter Weller spent most of his time between filming with all the actors who basically murder Murphy. He spent most of his time hanging out with Kurtwood Smith, Ray Wise, and Calvin Jung.
I mean, I'd probably be doing the same thing. I mean, it's Kurtwood Smith and Ray Wise, so
yeah. And he said,
I can't blame him.
And he said that the reason that he hung out with them the most is that they maintained healthy lifestyles while filming the movie, and Weller had to train a lot for a New York City marathon while they were doing the movie. So that's why most of his time was spent with them. It's kind of funny though that he spent like most of his time with like the characters that like completely take him out.
Yeah.
The post-production stuff is mainly I love the score for this movie.
Oh, the score's beautiful. The score is so good.
Another thing that you don't pay attention to when you're like a kid, I wasn't really paying attention to the music. But it's a beautiful piece of music. I'm gonna butcher this guy's name though. I think it's Basil, Basil, and I'll just spell his last name. It's Poledouris. I don't want to mess up the name, but it's
name, actually.
but it's a beautiful piece of music. Used really effective.
Doris, maybe.
Yes, yeah, probably, yeah. Like beautifully used in like two moments for me, the best, and it's when Emil's character is shooting at he's basically like, you're dead, we killed you, and then he's replaying that whole thing, and then the gas station explodes, and the music kind of swells after that whole thing, and after he like shoots Emil off the motorcycle. But probably the best moment of it is when this whole police force who's been rooting for Robocop turns on him because they've convinced him, like, he
attacked Dick Jones.
Yeah. And they're like gunning him down in that parking garage, and the music is just so like
it's like, so sad.
Yeah,
it's such a very sad piece of music, and for good reason, because we're watching RoboCop get gunned down, and for no reason whatsoever. He didn't do anything wrong, but this whole this whole cop thing, it bleeds into the whole corruption aspect, and you genuinely feel for the character, and the score helps elevate that sympathy, for the character and everything. And that I could actually I'll agree with you on that one. That actually might be one of my favorite moments, like even score wise in particular.
Yeah, it's all the things that it pieces together for you, right? It's like the cops are corrupt. This person has been like the whole movie that he's been Robocop has been like serving them and like protecting them and like doing all these things for them. And then like the one moment where they should maybe like verify like information, like they like there are some people like in that scene where like who try to stop it, like some of the cops who are like, no, you're gonna kill him, and like, no, like don't, and they basically tell them to try to stop, but like the majority of the police force is like, they're being led by a very corrupt organization, so like they all turn against him, and it's that whole like aspect of them like turning against him as like a gang, like he's kind of left all alone and like as like and completely weak. And it is cool that the end of that scene, the resolution of that scene is his partner who's been with him throughout the beginning of the movie when he's like Murphy as a human, and then now she's the one that like saves his life. And I think that I think that whole aspect of that scene is like, so the way it comes together is like so very good. And it also adds to the whole thing, like I'm glad that they just made them friends. Like they're just not like and it would also undercut, even though you only see the wife and kid in flashbacks, like it would also undercut his relationship with them. Like you don't like he had a wife and kid. Like it wasn't like he didn't have issues with them. Like he was a happily married man and like before he died. So if they were gonna make her as like, this kind of like quasi love interest, it would have kind of undercut that emotional aspect too.
I think they ended up touching up a little bit more on that on one of the sequels. I don't know if it was the second or third one, but
I think it's RoboCop 2 where she
shows up and sees him, right?
Yeah. It's like it's at it's like near the beginning of the movie, not the opening, but like I think after the big like opening sequence. And I forget what she does exactly. Like she eventually she leaves, right? She doesn't want to be like associated with him.
I don't remember how it went down exactly, because I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm like, I could have sworn that she met him, but I don't know if it was in the sequels or just I was watching the first movie. I'm like, okay, well, it definitely didn't happen here, so I'm guessing it was one of the sequels. But I don't know. I think it was just very touch and go. I guess just to like remind us that he had a wife.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it was very touch and go, and I guess after that they just really didn't touch on that anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting too because like again, it's a combination of like good writing and like how they edit all this stuff together, because you only get like a big flashback with him when he goes back to his house, and that's a good example too. That's another good example of the music. The music in that scene is really good too, because it's this whole buildup of like all these things that he's remembering, and then he gets so frustrated he ends up punching out that TV that's on the house that's like basically trying to sell them.
I don't know if it was the frustration of remembering. I'd probably be pretty annoyed too if somebody kept talking me and just trying to look at a damn house, dude. Like,
yeah, that's right. Like, if I want to buy it, I'll buy it. Yeah, but it works. You only get like that brief moment of like his past, basically, other than him talking about it, and then like it's the little things, him talking about it, like the whole like where'd you learn how to like twirl the gun? He's like, oh, it's a show I watched with my son, and then that gets integrated into the character too. Like that there's those little things that like I think are so good that like they seem so small, but they end up becoming so important like later.
Yeah. And I think it's honestly best that they kind of like left the family out of like the rest of the movie, because it just reminds us of how alone he is, after all that happened, eventually, like, with the police force, him being all alone after that, he's getting gunned down, and then his friend comes to the rescue. It just kind of helps us remind it, like, I guess it just reminds the audience, like I said, like how lonely he is or how alone he is in the world. And
yeah, exactly.
He's just a machine being controlled by the higher ups.
Yep. The big issue in post-production was the R rating. We talked about how the movie was very, very violent. The Motion Picture Association of America made them go through several cuts to get it to make it have an R rating. They originally gave it an X rating because of all the violence. Verhoeven said that they refused an R rating 8 times. He said there are reports out there that say 11, but he said it was 8. That is still a lot. They took issue with several scenes, including Murphy's death, the Ed 2 and I shooting the executive. We talked about that. And all they did was they shortened most of the violent scenes. And then like the media breaks that are in the movie, like the kind of the ads for like basically like their version of like Battleship and stuff like that. It's like all the like the commercials and stuff. They were thrown in to kind of lighten the mood and make it kind of funny to kind of undercut some of the violence. And that actually helped, I guess, with the MPA. they he was like, so it's weird too because if you watch the director's cut, yeah, they do linger on certain violent shots a little long, but it's not like it's like minutes. It's like seconds. It's like
Yeah,
maybe
like
five. It's weird that you.
it honestly makes me wonder what cut was shown to them like initially, because you watch the director's cut, it's not all that bad. And once like movies have like started moving a little bit more forward, you start to realize the like the slow gradual increase of how violence is depicted and how more lenient the MPAA eventually got to be. Because I think even like I think the 80s was just a big playground for the MPAA to give X ratings, because even Scarface, I believe, got an X rating because of its violence too.
Yep. And you also talked about how that scene with Emil when he gets disintegrated by the car was a big issue with the MPAA, but everyone, not just Verhoeven, but the studio refused to remove it because it got the biggest laughs during their test screenings, and they were like, "We don't want to take it out." So I guess when they kept resubmitting it, they were like, "No, this is not a serious like scene of violence. So just think of it as like a really funny, like over the top, like death scene." And then they were like, "Okay," they changed their mind. And I've heard little stories about the MPA, like if when they approached them, like, "Oh well, like Wes Craven had to deal with like that with Scream and a lot." And I don't really like talking about the Weinsteins, but one of the things that the Weinsteins did with Scream, when they kept getting like, when they couldn't get an R rating and they kept going above that, they were like, "Hey, Scream is not a horror film; it's a satire. It's supposed to be kind of a comedy almost. So if you look at it that way, it's not really like a hard R like horror film." And then the MPAA was like, "Okay, you're right," and then gave it an R rating based on those sensibilities, right? So that's the kind of the same thing that happened with like the Emil thing. They're like, "No, it's like it's funny. It's not really like a serious scene of violence." And then they were like, "Oh, okay, you guys can keep it in."
And then they watch
so
the
weird.
final cut and they're like, "This is not funny at all. This is
pretty
fucking terrifying."
Oh god. Oh, it's funny too. Like, so the media breaks that they put in the movie, like the commercials and stuff like that. I guess one reviewer was confused by it, and in his review complained that his projection is put in the wrong film reel, and that he was watching a different movie at one point. And Paul Verhoeven would have to be like, "No, that's our movie." You were not watching a different movie. Sorry. Um, as far as like the release and everything, like they were encouraged by like positive test screenings and stuff, and they were like, "Okay, we think we have something here." But there was I think marketing it became like an issue because it's like, how do you market it, especially at that time period, right? So it's 80s, 87. Action movies like that are pretty popular at the time. So do you market it as like a big dumb action movie, or do you try to like show off the more like intelligent aspects of the film? And they kind of people were also like Nancy Allen, I guess, when she read the script, like a lot of people initially were like, "That title's really dumb. This is gonna be a really dumb movie."
It's like,
it kind of
you should have heard the original title.
I know, right? God. It kind of worked out where like both of these things ended up working together. Where like the marketing, okay, we can market it as like a sci-fi action film, but they also had the benefit of when the movie opened, it opened to really good reviews, and they kind of had that going for it too, where there was all this chatter like, "Hey, this is like a pretty good movie," on top of just being like a fun action movie. It wasn't expected to be the #1 movie the weekend it came out. It earned let's see, on opening weekend, $8 million on opening weekend, which is not huge, but it's probably decent for 87. It actually topped.
For 87, it's a pretty big number.
Yeah, it topped a reissue of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which opened to 7.5 million, and it topped the opening of Jaws: The Revenge, which opened to 7.2 million.
7.2 for Jaws: The Revenge.
Yeah, opening weekend. It also was #1 for 2 weeks in a row. And even though it got knocked out of that spot, it's so crazy too, because in the weeks following, which means I'm gonna have to do an episode about this. You have the Lost Boys that came out like within like 3 weeks of this movie opening. So like they were saying, even though it never regained the top spot after its first 2 weeks, it had like legs throughout its entire run,
Hmm.
and ended up making 53.4 million by the time that it was all said and done. And it was the year's 14th highest grossing film behind Crocodile Dundee and La Bamba and Dragnet. Um,
Mm.
but it also wasn't expected to do huge business. So the fact that it ended up doing the business that it did uh, was a big surprise to Orion Pictures at the time.
Yeah, I think
Just like
especially since since usually R-rated movies are known for like not making a grand sum of money.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's why they were kind of thinking, not just because of its how violent it was, it might turn off an audience, but rather, how many people are actually going to go see this.
yeah, exactly. When it opened, we have I didn't even know Cinema Score was around in '87, but Cinema Score is like an audience poll for
Mhm.
opening day moviegoers, which can kind of make or break a movie. It got an A- Cinema Score when it opened. Um,
Nice.
and reviews were just all like mostly positive. Like a lot of people just pointed to the fact that they liked Verhoeven's direction because it was like smart and darkly comic, and they really loved like the social satire in it. They also were surprised by how how much emotional depth there was in the
Right.
film. And Roger Ebert praised Weller's performance and especially his ability to elicit sympathy and convey chivalry and vulnerability while mostly concealed beneath a bulky costume. Um, Washington Post said that Weller offered a certain beauty and grace to the part that they don't think most people could have achieved at the time. There's also a great compliment to him. And then Variety highlighted Nancy Allen as providing the only human warmth in the film, and said Kurtwood Smith was well cast as a sicko sadist, and that is pretty spot on.
I mean, they got that. They got yeah. That is pretty spot on.
It is true.
Especially like going back to that, especially with the line like "bitches leave." I mean, how much more
Yeah.
sadistic can you be?
But the thing that stood out, which is like the thing that Verhoeven didn't understand when he first read it, every reviewer said like the thing that stands out even today about RoboCop is that its view of like corporations and like interchangeable use of corporate executives and kind of how like it's interesting because like that aspect is going on in like big business in the movie, and it's also happening on the streets of Detroit within these smaller kind of crime syndicates, but there's just more money on this end and less money on the other end. And they thought that that duality that they were able to have within the movie was surprisingly very smart. And they said that it still holds up even today, that they were able to kind of strike that chord and get that right at the time. And as far as accolades, it won a special achievement for best sound editing at the 60th Academy Awards. So RoboCop has an Oscar. So good for RoboCop. It also received 2 other nominations for best film editing, and it lost to The Last Emperor, and best sound. It lost to also The Last Emperor. They also,
I think it got heavily nominated at the Saturn Awards, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It really did, actually. Let me see what they have here. Yeah, at the 15th Saturn Awards, RoboCop was the most nominated film. It won awards for Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director for Paul Verhoeven, Best Writing for Neumeyer and Miner, Best Makeup, Best Special Effects, and it received 3 further nominations, including Best Actor for Peter Weller and Best Actress for Nancy Allen.
Nice.
RoboCop was also a huge hit on VHS because, of course, this is when VHS was the only way you could watch movies at home. It made an additional, in its initial run on VHS, it made an additional $24 million in sales.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they said that the demand for rentals was very high when it came out, but the demand was so high. Actually, VHSs were very expensive at the time to buy. And so, like, releases like Dirty Dancing, RoboCop, Predator, Platoon, people were on a long wait list to actually get these movies for either a cheaper price or having enough money to afford a expensive copy of these movies on VHS.
I wonder how much VHSs were back then. Were they like around the same as like what we'd buy a
Like
movie for
what we
today?
yeah yeah maybe. Um, and
I mean,
of
now
course,
because now we're paying between what 25 to $40 for a movie now, especially if you want the
exactly.
higher quality stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. I mean, and like it's crazy that it made $24 million in sales, and I wonder if that's probably a combination of like rentals and then people also just buying it for absurd amount of money. Um,
I
oh
think a
god,
good chunk of that might have actually come out of the rentals.
yeah,
Renting tapes back then was actually a big deal. Apparently, it's
yeah,
evidently clear because my grandmother had a whole box of VHS tapes, and that's kind of how I got introduced to movies.
yeah. They said the film was popular in rental, peaking at number 1 in mid-March 1988, and the demand for rentals outstripped supply, so they didn't have enough.
Oh,
As estimates suggested that there was one VHS copy of a film per 100 households. So it made it difficult to find it for a little bit once people like were renting it a bunch. Um, so I mean, it started its life. I mean, it's weird because like yeah, it was financially successful in theaters like enough, but I think it found an even bigger life uh, once it hit home viewing, and I guess you can kind of call it a cult classic, even though it did reasonably well in theaters. I think its popularity only grew
hmm.
uh, after its life in theaters. I think, which probably encouraged. That's probably another reason they encouraged them to do a
Actually,
sequel too.
I mean, it even happens now because they actually started screening the 4K director's cut a lot in theaters.
Oh,
Most recently, they did it at Draft House for I think the 35th anniversary.
yep.
Um,
No, that's nice. And then, of course, it was followed by Robocop 2 in 1990. Robocop 3 are the one that Donnie shuns in 1993. And then there was a reboot, soft reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it, in 2014. And as far as we know, there has been this continuation of
yeah,
it that's been in
uh,
development.
yeah. Apparently, it's been in development since 2020. I'm guessing it might have just been like a COVID related issue that might have delayed filming, probably. But
Yeah,
to my understanding, it's supposed to retcon the two sequels, and it's
it's
supposed to
gonna
be
be like
directly.
a direct sequel to the '87 movie.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
Following
I see that.
2018 in
Yeah,
it.
I see that here. RoboCop Returns is intended to be a direct sequel to RoboCop that ignores the series' other films. Um, the film is set to be directed by Abe Forsyth, who is rewriting a script written by Newmeyer and Miner, who wrote the original. In 2020, Ed Newmeyer revealed to Movie Hole that a RoboCop prequel TV series is also in development, which will focus on a young Dick Jones and the rise of omni-consumer products. That was in 2020, though. I mean, a lot has been in development and dropped since COVID hit. I haven't heard anything about the RoboCop sequel or this TV prequel in a while.
Well, something
Uh,
I heard about recently was a video game.
yeah, oh yeah, I
They,
did hear about that. Yeah,
I think they dropped a trailer and everything. It honestly looks really fun. Like, don't get me wrong, like the game looks great.
yeah,
Um, I'm just surprised because it kind of goes back to that whole RoboCop versus Terminator thing that I brought up at first.
yeah.
Because at the same time, there's also a new Terminator game dropping, and it's supposed to be like an open world survival type of game.
Okay.
And it's super. The timing of it's remarkable because both of these things are dropping at the same time. Now all we need is another Terminator reboot, and maybe maybe we'll get the crossover we've always wanted.
Yeah, I mean, if they reboot Terminator again, just don't throw $180 million into it. Try to make
And
it
don't
on the
recast,
cheap.
and then don't recast for a recast because that was a big mess.
Yeah,
The-
it was. I talked about this on the episode that we recorded for this week that's coming out tomorrow, and we were talking about Comic Con because I might be going, and then our guest is definitely going, and we were talking about he was also there for like the Terminator Dark Fate panel that they had at Comic Con when that
Mm.
movie was about to come out, and I was like, the hysteria in that room, everyone was excited for that footage that they saw, like. But then I realized that and I realized this working for Joe Blow, and then like having to go online to get like initial Twitter reactions and all this stuff. There's initial excitement from like a groundswell of fans that love this stuff. And I've learned like kind of the hard way that that is not like usually the mass opinion of everyone else. So while that
Mhm.
room was super excited for Terminator Dark Fate, I remember when that movie opened and it kind of like it was clear on opening day that it was not going to do well that opening weekend. I was like, well, what the fuck
Mhm.
happened? I thought everyone wanted Linda Hamilton back.
Yeah,
I
because
thought they wanted it.
because when they announced Dark Fate, I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like they're kind of trying to fix something here, and I'll appreciate that. You know, we got what's his name, the director of Deadpool, I think that came
Yeah,
in.
I'm blanking on his name right
He
now,
stepped
but
in.
yeah,
Yeah, I can't think of his name, but I'm like, okay, well, this is a good team. They're bringing it back to the R-rated roots, which is pretty neat. You know,
James
maybe we'll
Cameron's
get
producing it, and he co-wrote.
exactly.
He co-wrote the story. Yeah, like all
And
pieces in place.
you know, when I watched it for the first time, I don't know. I felt bored watching it. Like
Yeah,
I just caught myself being a little bit bored. Like the action was great. You know, I liked Mackenzie Davis as a Terminator. I thought she did a very good job. It's nice to see
yeah,
Arnold again, Linda Hamilton. You know, all these faces. You know, like old and new. And you know, it was neat to see, but they butchered the story
right.
completely. And I didn't appreciate that they, you know, basically brought back Edward Furlong, which wasn't even Edward Furlong. It was just a deep fake Edward Furlong. And they just kill him in the first 2 minutes. I'm like, so what the hell were you guys trying to accomplish here? Like, there's really nothing to be said other than you just ruined the movie by killing John Connor.
Yep. In the first 5 minutes.
In the first
The first
5 minutes,
5
I'm like, okay,
you
cool.
just
Like John Connor's coming back. Edward Furlong's gonna reprise his role. Fuck yeah! Like let's go. Nope,
yeah,
was
no,
not what I was expecting it to
not
be.
not at all, not at all. Um, well, to kind of wrap this up, I mean, so this movie came out 35 years ago. Of
Mhm.
course, we've all discovered it in different stages of life. Like people who are older, like either grew up with it, or people who are younger discovered it on their own. Um, I mean, you kind of touched on it too. I think it still holds up very well today. Of course, there are some things about that are very 80s. Like we talked about the excess of like the violence and like the drugs and like all that stuff. That is very 80s. But the overall
The, fu-
story,
the
very
futuristic,
80, very 80s.
the futuristic prediction of vapes.
Yeah, yeah. But the overall story holds up really well, and I think like the action holds up well. Like a lot of it still resonates, I think, and I think that um, it's that kind of movie that I think even 35 years from now, people will be able to watch it and be like, "There's something very good here."
And you know, I think what advantages a lot for the movie, especially like with the action sequences and everything, is how practical it was.
Right?
You know, they didn't like. I know CGI wasn't big back then, but this was already like, you know, the pre level or the pre stages of CGI that
Yeah,
didn't start happening until the 90s.
yeah,
They could have easily done that. You know, they could have just copped out and said, you know what, let's just do, you know, computer animation, whatever. And I'm glad they didn't. You know, they wanted something a little more grounded. They wanted it to be as practical as possible. And 35 years later, I can even say it actually holds up a lot better than some of the action movies we've gotten recently. You
yeah.
know,
I think so too.
you
I
know,
think a lot of those.
it's
I
that
think
forgiving.
a lot of those movies from the 80s. I think really do, and I think that's like what you said. Like a lot of it is like the use of practical effects, so you're not really looking at like CGI that's dated. Like
Mhm.
so like there that's like I watched Predator again recently, and while there are some effects used to like kind of like the whole camouflaging thing for like the Predator
Yeah.
and all that, like for the most part, that's just all like practical stuff in action, and like that movie still holds up really well. Before that, because of that same reason, I think it's like it's the use of like that's why I will never understand. Like, I mean, I fully support all those people who were making practical effects back then, who were like, I wish we didn't move away from this because it's just so much. There's a lot more realism there, and
Mhm.
like I think you lose that when there's so much CGI. And you're right, there's not well, any of that. I guess in RoboCop, it's like
Yeah,
the
I mean,
most.
given the
I
budget
mean, I
being
guess
so
the
low,
yeah,
I mean, I think that's probably why. Because I mean, CGI is really expensive, and nowadays that's where most of the budget goes.
yeah,
And you
because
know, oh,
even
sorry.
the fight, no, even the like the fight with I don't know if you'd call it a fight, but like the Ed 209 RoboCop thing when he goes to Dick Jones' office, um, I know, like for like for some of it, when they have to be close together, when he like explodes the arm of
Mhm.
Ant 209, there's like some stuff used there. But I don't even think that's like CGI. I think that's just like
I
I
kind
forgot
of
like
look
they
I kind of look more like stop motion, if anything.
stop motion. Yeah,
I think they just like enlarged it, like using
yeah,
some camera trick or maybe some very neat placement.
yeah,
Because I was actually gonna say, I'm like, I guess a robot could be considered CGI, but at the same time, since they were trying to be as practical as possible, or given the fact, I guess stop motion and just an enlargement emphasis on the robot itself. I think that's how they pulled that off. Kind of makes me
yeah,
want to watch the behind the scenes again, just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think its legacy will kind of live on for ever, and like it, these are the kind of movies that you want to talk about like when they hit these kind of milestones, because like it is interesting, because like sometimes you get like a 20th, 30th, 35th anniversary and it's like, oh well, this didn't really hold up that well, especially if they're talking like about particular issues that like, oh, like that wouldn't fly today, you couldn't make that movie today.
Mhm.
But this, the way it's talking about like corporate greed and like, how we deal with like handling the police and like corruption and like, all that stuff is still very much relevant, and people are still talking about it. And I think that's why, I mean, almost in a sad way, like Robocop is still like, oh, you can still look at that and be like, this was made in '87, and like we're still kind of like in this place currently in 2022 when it comes to a lot of these things. Um, but that's like the power of filmmaking, though. I mean, like some of these writers see it, and
Yeah.
like they kind of capture like lightning in the bottle, and then like years and years later, it's like, oh, this is what I was seeing in '87, and this is where we're at today. It's like really interesting, but I think that's why the movie continues to hold up. Um, I don't know what I want from it now. I mean, I do like the idea. It's interesting to kind of think of a sequel that would just pick up after the original. Um,
I'm the only skepticism that I have is, are they still going to cast Peter Weller given his condition now?
Probably not. So it'd be a different guy, I would assume.
But that's my skepticism, is who would they cast now as a RoboCop that could pretty much be the next Peter Weller?
Right. And you know what? Like, I honestly think I don't necessarily need another film, but I do think because of where we've kind of come with like miniseries and limited series, I think a TV show would be really
Oh
good if
yeah.
you can if you can get like on like a HBO Max or like a like one of the streaming servers or even like cable network or whatever. Like I think it would
A
work in that
solid
format really
a
well.
solid 8 episode limited series would probably work and benefit very
Yeah,
highly.
I think it would
Because I
benefit
don't
the
know.
concept.
I think because I mean, yeah, you could do a movie, but I feel like for something such as RoboCop, and being that there could be a lot of advantageous world building, yeah, like you say, a series would probably work a lot better in terms of doing that.
Yeah,
But I mean, I don't know what they're gonna do. I'm curious to see what they'll do. Who's gonna direct it? I don't know. I think it's just one of those like cautiously optimistic things where I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna like you know take pride in like say I'm excited for it, but at the same time, I'm not gonna not be excited for it.
yeah, exactly. Well, well, at least we still will always have RoboCop, so that's good. And I'll even take RoboCop 2, and then we can. I agree with you. We can put RoboCop 3 in the. It's just not. I just you can retcon it out. You can be like, it didn't happen. It's like it just
Yeah,
didn't happen.
that's all I say is like I've only watched it once. I only needed to watch it once, and believe me, I don't think I'll ever watch it again unless I'm
Yeah,
held at gunpoint or dead or alive. I have to watch it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I
Those
don't.
those first two movies are canon, and then that third one is uh,
Mm.
a
Which is why I'm
mistake.
glad which is why I'm kind of glad that this direct sequel's like retconning those two. I mean, not that there's anything, not that I hate the second one in its entirety. I'm glad that the third one's just not going to be mentioned at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, we don't have to. It could be erased from our minds. Okay, neuralized Men in Black style, pretty much. So we don't
Oh
have to like think
God.
about it anymore. Well, thank you, man, for coming on and helping out and talking about
Yeah, of course.
this movie. Of course, we have like many more anniversary episodes coming down the pipeline. So, if you want to be involved in any of those, just let me know.
Oh, of course,
Um,
man.
and then I will, in the bio for this episode, his link to his Instagram page will be listed as well. So you can follow him in his movie reviews. Encourage him to hop on Twitter. Uh,
I'm slowly walking in that direction. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
slowly
he's
getting
getting there. He's getting there. And then other than that, I have to thank Playlist Studios who does this podcast because they actually do a lot of the legwork that myself and co-host Owen and Jack cannot do because we're really busy, and that's a lot of the editing and then like some of the promotional stuff as well. So they're always a big help. So thank them. And you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcast fixed, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Good Pods has been another really good one where a lot of independent podcasters are getting discovered. And it's growing and growing by the day. So that's another way to listen to us. The YouTube channel is on pause right now, but I'm actually having a meeting with Playlist tomorrow because they want to start live streaming our episodes and posting them straight to YouTube that way. So we're going to see how that goes. So that might be something new that's coming in the next few weeks. And then up next we have an anniversary episode for The Dark Knight Rises, which turns 10. So
already.
yeah, that's weird. I know. I feel like
it seemed like only yesterday, like Nolan made his trilogy, but it actually
Yeah.
hasn't been that long.
it's also weird that like because we did an anniversary episode for the Amazing Spider-Man, I was like they came out the same summer, like like I didn't even like realize.
Wow.
Yeah, the same summer. So yeah, that we'll be talking about that. Maybe if you have time, you can jump on that one as well. But it should be a fun one. So thank you again, my friend, for hopping on, and it's been a good one.
It has been a good one indeed. Thanks for having me.
No problem, buddy.